I'm Samantha Wilson, 29, and I've always felt like the odd puzzle piece in my wealthy adoptive family. But nothing prepared me for that horrific night at Harrington's when my sister Madison looked me in the eye and said, "We need this table for actual family," before handing me a $3,270 bill for a meal I barely touched. That single moment shattered everything I thought I knew about family and began a journey that would ultimately set me free. Before I share how this betrayal changed my life forever, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I finally found my true worth beyond the family that never fully accepted me. My story begins when I was 4 years old. My biological parents, Maria and James Wilson, died in a devastating car accident on a rainy Boston evening. With no living relatives able to take me in, I entered the foster care system briefly before the Brooks family adopted me. Eleanor and Richard Brooks were wealthy Bostonians with 2 biological children, Madison, who was 7 at the time, and Tyler, who was 2. The Brooks family lived in a sprawling mansion in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. They also owned vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard and Aspen. Richard ran a successful investment firm that had been in his family for generations, while Eleanor managed several charitable foundations, mostly as a society obligation rather than genuine passion. My earliest memories with the Brooks family are a mixture of wonder and confusion. I remember walking into their home for the first time, clutching a small suitcase containing the few belongings I had, staring wide-eyed at crystal chandeliers and marble floors that seemed to stretch forever. Eleanor had decorated a beautiful bedroom for me with a canopy bed and custom dollhouse, but it felt like stepping into someone else's dream rather than coming home. Despite their wealth and privilege, Eleanor and Richard genuinely tried to make me feel included. They enrolled me in the same prestigious private school as Madison, bought me identical clothing, and never explicitly differentiated between me and their biological children when introducing us to their social circle. But actions speak louder than words, and the subtle differences were always there. Madison, from the very beginning, established a pattern of subtle exclusion. When friends came over, she would introduce me with a quick, "This is Sam. She's adopted," setting me apart before I could even speak for myself. She would make comments about how I didn't have the Brooks nose or eyes, reminders that I wasn't really one of them. These microaggressions weren't overt enough for her parents to notice or address, but they accumulated over time, building walls between us. Tyler was different. Being younger when I arrived, he accepted me more readily. We built pillow forts together and rode bikes around the neighborhood. But as he grew older, he was increasingly pulled into his father's world of business connections and legacy planning, spending summers interning at the firm and weekends at country clubs. Our relationship remained cordial, but increasingly distant as we entered our teens. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I struggled with my identity. I felt immense gratitude toward the Brooks for giving me a home, opportunities, and material comfort beyond anything I might have had otherwise. But gratitude is a complicated emotion when mixed with the sense that you must constantly earn your place. I never took my adoption for granted, which meant I never fully relaxed into belonging. School became my refuge. Unlike the complicated dynamics at home, academic achievement provided clear metrics for success. I threw myself into studies, excelling particularly in science and health subjects. My adoptive parents were proud of my accomplishments, though Madison often made comments about how I was overcompensating. By high school, I had decided to pursue a career in pediatric physical therapy, wanting to help children overcome physical challenges. Perhaps helping others navigate their own obstacles was my way of processing my emotional ones. During college at Boston University, I began to build an identity separate from the Brooks name. I made friends who knew nothing of my wealthy family, worked part-time jobs despite not needing the money, and gradually created a world where I was valued for who I was rather than where I came from. After graduation and completing my doctorate in physical therapy, I secured a position at Boston Children's Hospital, where I quickly gained a reputation for my work with trauma survivors and children with developmental challenges. Despite creating some independence, I maintained regular contact with the Brooks family. Sunday dinners were a tradition, and I attended most family holidays and celebrations. I genuinely loved my adoptive parents, appreciated Tyler's friendly, if somewhat distant relationship, and had reached a cordial détente with Madison, who had followed in her mother's footsteps, marrying well and managing charitable committees rather than pursuing a career. The frequency of family gatherings increased as Eleanor and Richard's 40th wedding anniversary approached. This milestone celebration was scheduled for later in the year, and preparations had begun months in advance. Little did I know that another family event would first test the foundations of my place within the Brooks family: Madison's engagement to William Huntington III, heir to a banking fortune and the perfect addition to the Brooks dynasty. Madison's engagement to William was announced at an intimate family dinner before being shared with the Boston Society pages. I remember the evening clearly. Eleanor had ordered in from Madison's favorite French restaurant. Champagne flowed freely, and Madison couldn't stop flashing her 7-carat diamond ring under every light source in the house. I was genuinely happy for her. Despite our complicated relationship, I wanted her to find happiness. 2 weeks later, the official engagement party was held at the Boston Harbor Hotel. Over 200 guests from Boston's elite circles attended, and I spent the evening smiling politely as I was repeatedly introduced by Eleanor as our adopted daughter, Samantha. Never just our daughter. Each time she added that qualifier, I felt a small pinch in my chest, but I brushed it aside. This was Madison's night, after all, and I didn't want to make it about my insecurities. After the engagement announcement, wedding preparations consumed family conversations. Madison had selected a June date at Trinity Church with a reception at the Four Seasons. As the self-appointed wedding coordinator, Eleanor's calendar was suddenly filled with vendor meetings, venue visits, and endless discussions about flower arrangements and menu selections. I was included in these activities, though often as an afterthought. "Oh, Samantha should probably come to the cake tasting too," Eleanor would say, calling me separately after arrangements with Madison had already been made. I told myself they were simply caught up in the excitement and that the oversight wasn't intentional. The first clear warning sign came during a family dinner when Madison and Eleanor were discussing the wedding photographer. I had just returned from the kitchen with a water pitcher when I overheard Madison saying, "For the main family portraits, I want just us, you, Dad, Tyler, and me. We can do a separate set with Sam and the extended family." Eleanor hesitated before responding, "Don't you think Sam might be hurt by that arrangement?" "Mom," Madison replied with exasperation, "it's my wedding, and I want some photos with just my real family. Is that too much to ask?" They noticed me standing in the doorway then, and the conversation abruptly shifted to discussions of centerpieces. I served the water with slightly trembling hands, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The phrase "real family" echoed in my mind. The next day, I sought out Richard in his home office, hoping for some reassurance. He was always the more emotionally intuitive parent, despite his reserved demeanor. "Dad," I began, perched on the leather sofa across from his desk, "do you and Mom think of me differently than Madison and Tyler? Because I'm adopted." Richard removed his reading glasses and looked at me with genuine concern. "Sam, we love you just as much as your siblings. You're our daughter in every way that matters." "But not in every way," I said quietly. He sighed, struggling to find the right words. "Family is complicated, honey. What matters is that we chose you. We wanted you in our lives. That's special in its own way." I appreciated his attempt, but his words confirmed what I already knew. I was different, and that difference mattered to them in ways they couldn't fully acknowledge, even to themselves. The dress shopping incident a few weeks later only reinforced this reality. Madison, Eleanor, and I, along with Madison's 2 oldest friends from boarding school, visited an exclusive bridal salon to look at bridesmaid dresses. As I tried on a sample gown, Madison circled me critically. "The cut is all wrong for you," she declared. "Your body type is so different from the rest of us with our Brooks genes." "Madison," Eleanor admonished, though her tone was more embarrassed than truly disapproving. "What?" "I'm just saying we need to find something that works for different figures. It's not like I said anything wrong." Madison's defensive response shut down any further discussion, and I retreated to the dressing room, blinking back tears as I changed back into my clothes. These incidents left me increasingly distressed. I began seeing my therapist, Dr. Jenna Reynolds, twice a month instead of my usual monthly check-in. Dr. Reynolds had been helping me navigate adoption-related identity issues since college, and she provided crucial perspective during this challenging time. "What you're experiencing is unfortunately common for adoptees," she explained during one session. "Major family milestones often bring submerged dynamics to the surface. The question is how you want to handle these situations in a way that protects your emotional well-being while maintaining the relationships that are important to you." I decided to continue participating in wedding activities despite the hurt. These were, after all, the only family I had known since age 4. I hoped that by remaining present and supportive, I could bridge the growing gap between us, even as evidence mounted that Madison viewed me as fundamentally separate from the real Brooks family. Madison's official bridesmaid proposal event was held at a rooftop bar overlooking the Boston skyline. She presented each of her 7 chosen friends with monogrammed gift boxes containing silk robes, champagne flutes, and personalized jewelry. I watched as each woman squealed with delight, hugging Madison and admiring their gifts. I was the last to receive my box, almost as an afterthought when one of the other bridesmaids asked, "What about your sister?" "Of course," Madison said with a tight smile, handing me an identical box. I couldn't forget my sister. But the way she emphasized sister felt performative, as if she were reminding everyone of her generosity and including me rather than celebrating our relationship. The bachelor and bachelorette weekends were scheduled for the same time in different locations, the men heading to a golf resort in Scottsdale, while the women took over a beachfront property in the Hamptons. During the bachelorette weekend, I overheard 2 of Madison's friends discussing me by the pool when they thought I was napping under an umbrella. "It's so weird that Madison's parents adopted when they already had their own kids," one said, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Like, why complicate things?" "I guess it was the charitable thing to do," the other replied. "You know Eleanor and her foundations. But Madison says it was super awkward growing up with someone who didn't really fit." I kept my eyes closed, my heart racing as they continued dissecting my presence in the family as if I were a peculiar social experiment rather than a person with feelings. That night, I excused myself early from dinner, claiming a migraine, and cried silently into my pillow while the celebration continued downstairs. Despite these painful experiences, I doubled down on helping with wedding preparations. I organized Madison's bridal shower, coordinated with vendors when Eleanor was overwhelmed, and spent hours addressing hand-calligraphed invitations. Perhaps I thought that by proving my value, I could earn the full acceptance that had eluded me for 25 years. During Madison's final wedding dress fitting, I waited in the boutique sitting area while she, Eleanor, and Madison's maid of honor Laura were in the private fitting room. The heavy curtain hadn't been completely closed, and their voices carried clearly to where I sat. "The dress is absolute perfection," Laura gushed. "You look like a true Brooks in that family heirloom lace." "Speaking of family," Madison replied, lowering her voice slightly, "Mom made sure I included Sam as a bridesmaid. I mean, I would have anyway eventually, but you know how it is. I had to include her." "At least she's been helpful with all the planning," Eleanor offered, though her tone suggested she was trying to smooth over an awkward moment rather than genuinely defending me. I sat frozen, the bridal magazine I'd been flipping through forgotten in my lap. The casual dismissal of my presence in the wedding party stung worse than any direct confrontation could have. When they emerged from the fitting room, I plastered on a smile and complimented Madison's dress with as much enthusiasm as I could muster. The following week, a dinner was held at my parents' home to discuss some final wedding details and, more significantly, to talk about certain family heirlooms that would be incorporated into the ceremony and reception. Richard proudly showed the antique Brooks family Bible that would be used during the ceremony, and Eleanor presented Madison with the pearl and diamond hair comb that Brooks brides had worn for 4 generations. "When Tyler gets married, his bride will receive the sapphire earrings," Eleanor explained to William's parents who were also present. We have a tradition of passing down specific pieces to each child. And what will Sam receive? William's mother asked innocently, looking at me with a kind smile. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Richard cleared his throat and mumbled something about different arrangements, while Eleanor quickly changed the subject to the vintage champagne coupes they'd be using for the toast. The message was clear: family heirlooms were for blood relatives, not adopted ones. I excused myself to help the caterer in the kitchen, needing a moment alone to compose myself. During this difficult period, I found an unexpected ally in William's sister Jessica. 3 years older than Madison, Jessica was a corporate attorney with a direct manner and keen observational skills. She noticed the subtle ways I was being sidelined and made a point of seeking me out at family gatherings. "Your sister's behavior is appalling," she told me bluntly during one pre-wedding event, finding me alone on a terrace. "And your parents are enabling it." "They don't mean to hurt me," I defended automatically, the response ingrained after years of making excuses for my family. Jessica fixed me with a knowing look. "Intent doesn't negate impact, Samantha. You deserve better." Her validation of my experience was like a crack appearing in a dam. Someone else could see what was happening. I wasn't imagining or exaggerating the exclusion. The situation came to a head 2 weeks before the wedding when Madison and I had a heated argument about seating arrangements for the reception. I had noticed that I was seated at a table with distant cousins rather than at the main family table. "Is there a reason I'm not seated with you and Mom and Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral as we reviewed the seating chart spread across the dining room table. Madison sighed dramatically. "The head table is just for immediate family and the wedding party." "But I am immediate family." "And a bridesmaid," I pointed out. "You know what I mean, Sam," she said, irritation creeping into her voice. "Blood family. Plus, we needed to make room for William's grandmother at our table, and someone had to be moved. And I was the obvious choice because I'm adopted," I stated flatly. "Don't make this into a thing," Madison snapped. "Not everything is about your adoption. God, you've always been so sensitive about it." The argument escalated quickly, with years of suppressed feelings bubbling to the surface. When Eleanor and Richard arrived home to find us in a full-blown shouting match, they attempted to mediate but ultimately pulled me aside. "Sam, please try to be understanding," Eleanor pleaded. "Madison is under so much stress with the wedding. Maybe this isn't the time to address these deeper issues." "When is the time, Mom?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because for 25 years, it's never been the right time." Richard patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Let's just get through the wedding, and then we can discuss family dynamics all you want." I left their house that evening feeling more isolated than ever. That night, I received news of a significant promotion at work. I would be heading a new pediatric rehabilitation program designed specifically for children from traumatic backgrounds. It should have been a moment of triumph, a validation of my professional path. But when I called to share the news with my parents, they listened politely before quickly returning to discussions of wedding details. My achievement, like so many others, was overshadowed by Madison's moment in the spotlight. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening before the Saturday wedding at Harrington's, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. The historic venue, with its rich mahogany paneling and crystal chandeliers, had been reserved months in advance, with Richard sparing no expense for his eldest daughter's celebration. I spent extra time preparing for the evening, selecting a deep burgundy dress that complemented my figure and having my dark hair styled in soft waves. Perhaps it was vanity, or maybe just a desperate need to feel confident in the face of what had become an increasingly uncomfortable situation. As I applied my makeup, I gave myself a pep talk in the mirror. "Just get through the next few days with grace. This isn't about you." Harrington's private dining room was stunning, with elaborate floral arrangements in Madison's chosen colors of cream and blush adorning each table. Champagne flowed freely as guests arrived. William's large extended family, the wedding party, and various family friends important enough to merit an invitation to this exclusive pre-wedding event. The evening began pleasantly enough. I chatted with Tyler, who had brought his fiancée Alexis, a marketing executive he'd met during business school. William's parents were warm in their greetings, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that the night would pass without incident. That hope was shattered when dinner was about to be served. Madison, wearing a white cocktail dress that likely cost more than my monthly salary, began rearranging place cards at the tables. I watched in confusion as she picked up my card from the family table and walked it across the room. "Madison, what are you doing?" I asked, following her to a table in the far corner of the room where she was placing my card. "Oh, Sam," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We had a last-minute RSVP from William's godparents. They need to be at the family table, so I'm moving you to table 7. I glanced at table 7, populated with William's distant cousins whom I'd met exactly once and a couple of his colleagues I'd never spoken to. "But I'm your sister," I said quietly, conscious of nearby guests who were beginning to notice our conversation. Madison's smile tightened. "We need this table for actual family members," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden lull of conversation around us. "I'm sure you understand." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I felt dozens of eyes on me as the implication of Madison's words hung in the air. My face burned with humiliation, and I looked instinctively toward my parents for support. Eleanor was studiously arranging her napkin on her lap, avoiding eye contact entirely. Richard looked pained but remained silent, his discomfort evident but his loyalty clearly with Madison. Tyler half rose from his seat, opening his mouth as if to object, but Alexis placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering something in his ear that made him sink back down. In that moment, surrounded by people yet completely alone, I made the hardest decision of my evening: to stay. To walk to table 7 with as much dignity as I could muster, to smile politely at the strangers I'd be dining with, and to endure the pitying glances cast my way throughout the 5-course meal. Each bite tasted like ash, and the elaborate food went largely untouched on my plate as I struggled to maintain my composure. As coffee and dessert were being served, I noticed Madison in deep conversation with the maitre d', gesturing in my direction several times. My stomach tightened with apprehension, though I couldn't imagine what further humiliation awaited me. I didn't have to wait long to find out. As guests began to mingle again after dinner, Madison approached my table with a leather folder in her hand. "Sam, I need to give you this," she said, placing the folder beside my barely touched chocolate torte. Inside was an itemized bill for $3,270. The amount included charges for premium wines I hadn't ordered and an individual portion of the venue rental fee. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Dad agreed to cover dinner for family," Madison explained with a shrug. "Since you're at a separate table, your section needs to be handled separately. I'm sure you understand." She emphasized the word family just enough to twist the knife deeper. "I can't afford this," I whispered, shock giving way to panic as I stared at the astronomical figure. My promotion hadn't kicked in yet, and while my salary as a physical therapist was respectable, it was nowhere near what would make a $3,270 dinner bill manageable. "Oh," Madison said, her feigned surprise unconvincing. "Well, I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe a payment plan?" She walked away before I could respond, rejoining the family table where animated conversation continued as if nothing had happened. I sat frozen, the bill burning a hole in my consciousness, completely humiliated and unsure what to do. The depth of the rejection, not just being physically separated from my family, but being handed a bill to underscore that separation, felt like a physical blow. Jessica, who had witnessed the exchange, appeared at my side. Without a word, she took the bill, examined it briefly, then pulled out her credit card and signaled to a waiter. "You don't have to do that," I protested weakly. "I know I don't," she replied, her expression grim. "But I'm going to anyway, because what just happened is unconscionable." After handling the payment, she turned to me. "Let me take you home." I nodded, beyond words at this point. We slipped out without goodbyes, Jessica's arm supportive around my shoulders as we walked to the valet stand. The drive to my apartment passed in silence, Jessica occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand in solidarity. When we arrived at my building, she turned to me. Sam, I know they're your family, but what Madison did tonight was cruel. And your parents letting it happen was cowardly. You deserve better. I nodded, tears finally spilling over. Thank you, I managed before exiting her car. Inside my apartment, alone at last, I allowed myself to break down completely. Years of subtle exclusion had culminated in this public rejection, this explicit statement that despite 25 years as a Brooks, I would always be an outsider. The rehearsal dinner incident wasn't just about a seating arrangement or a bill, it was the crystallization of my worst fears about my place in the family. That night, crying until I had no tears left, I began to question whether I should attend the wedding at all. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I had barely slept, spending most of the night cycling through anger, hurt, and indecision about whether to attend the ceremony. Around 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Please come today. I know Mads was horrible, but don't let her win by staying away. I need an ally. Love you. His message tilted the scales. Despite everything, Tyler had always shown me kindness in his own reserved way. I couldn't abandon him to face the day alone. With a heavy heart, I began preparing for the wedding, applying extra concealer to hide the evidence of my sleepless night. My bridesmaid dress, a blush silk gown that had required extensive alterations to fit properly, hung on my closet door like a taunt. After the rehearsal dinner, I couldn't bring myself to stand beside Madison, smiling for photos as if nothing had happened. I selected a simple navy dress from my closet instead, appropriate for a wedding guest, but not a bridesmaid. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Boston Public Garden, where a section had been transformed with floral arches and white chairs for the 200 guests. I arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to speak briefly with my parents before things got underway. As I approached the bride's preparation area, a white tent set up discreetly behind the ceremony space, I could hear Madison's voice carrying through the canvas. "Where's Sam? She's supposed to be here for hair and makeup. The photographer wants bridesmaid photos in 20 minutes. I took a deep breath and pushed aside the tent flap. The scene inside froze. Madison in her half-finished hairstyling, Eleanor fussing with the veil, the other bridesmaids in various stages of preparation. All eyes turned to me, taking in my navy dress and clearly independent preparation. "What are you wearing?" Madison demanded. "Where's your bridesmaid dress?" "I won't be standing up with you today, Madison," I said quietly. "After last night, I think we both know that would be inappropriate." Eleanor stepped forward, her expression pleading. "Samantha, please don't make a scene." "Not today." "I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm making a choice, probably the first real choice I've made about my role in this family in 25 years. I'll attend the ceremony as a guest to support Tyler and Dad, but I won't pretend to be part of the bridal party when Madison made it abundantly clear last night where I stand." Madison's face flushed with anger. "So dramatic," she huffed. "It was just a seating arrangement." "And a $3,270 bill," I added, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Because I'm not family enough to be covered by Dad." Eleanor's eyes widened at this, glancing questioningly at Madison, who avoided her gaze. Perhaps this detail hadn't been shared with our parents. "We can discuss this later," Eleanor insisted. "Right now, everyone needs to finish getting ready." I nodded. "Yes, you all should prepare. I'll find a seat with the other guests." I turned to leave, pausing at the tent entrance. "Congratulations, Madison. I hope your day is everything you wanted." I meant it sincerely, despite everything. 25 years of conditioning to prioritize her happiness couldn't be undone in a single night. The ceremony proceeded without incident. I sat in the back row, watching as Madison walked down the aisle on Richard's arm, Tyler standing beside William as a groomsman. The vows were personal and touching, the setting idyllic. I applauded politely with the other guests when the couple was pronounced husband and wife, and quietly slipped away during the post-ceremony photographs, taking a solitary walk around the garden to compose myself before heading to the reception at the Four Seasons. At the reception, I discovered I had been seated at the very back of the ballroom with several business associates of Richard's whom I barely knew. The seating card had obviously been hastily created to replace my bridesmaid placement. I made polite conversation through dinner, deflecting questions about why I wasn't in the bridal party with vague references to last-minute changes. As I picked at my salmon entree, Madison appeared beside my table, champagne glass in hand and color high in her cheeks from dancing and celebration. "At least you didn't have to pay for this meal," she said, her attempt at humor falling painfully flat as she gestured at my plate. Something snapped inside me. 25 years of making myself smaller, of accepting scraps of belonging, of excusing microaggressions, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. This would never stop unless I stopped it. I stood up, smoothing my navy dress. "Excuse me," I said to my table companions, then made my way deliberately toward the microphone stand that had been set up for toasts. The DJ, seeing me approach, assumed I was next in the program and handed over the microphone with a smile. The room quieted, 200 faces turning expectantly toward me. At the head table, Madison's expression shifted from surprise to alarm. Eleanor half rose from her seat, while Richard looked confused. Only Tyler watched me with what appeared to be hope in his eyes. "For those who don't know me," I began, my voice steady despite my pounding heart, "I'm Samantha Wilson. The Brooks family adopted me when I was 4 years old after my biological parents died in a car accident. For 25 years, I've been grateful for the life they gave me, the opportunities, the privilege of being part of this family." I paused, taking in the sea of curious faces. But gratitude and belonging aren't the same thing. Last night, at the rehearsal dinner, Madison told me to move to another table because the family table was for actual family members. Then she handed me a bill for $3,270. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Madison's face had gone pale, while Eleanor and Richard looked stricken. "I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone," I continued. "I'm sharing it because family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's defined by love, respect, and inclusion. For anyone here struggling with feeling like you don't belong, like you're not enough, you are. Your worth isn't determined by others' acceptance." I reached into my purse and withdrew an envelope containing a check for $3,270 that I'd written that morning, borrowing against my credit card's cash advance to cover it. I walked to the head table and placed it in front of Madison. "I've covered my part of last night's dinner. Consider it my wedding gift. I wish you and William every happiness, Madison. But I also wish for you the wisdom to build a family based on love rather than obligation or biology." With that, I returned the microphone to the stunned DJ and walked out of the ballroom, head held high despite the shocked silence behind me. In that moment, as terrifying as it was, I felt more authentic than I had in years. The weight of seeking approval had been lifted, replaced by the unfamiliar lightness of standing in my own truth. The week following Madison's wedding passed in complete silence from my adoptive family. No calls, no texts, not even an email. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction of my new position heading the pediatric rehabilitation program. Focusing on children who had experienced trauma provided a much-needed perspective on my own situation. My pain was real, but I had the adult resources and support to navigate it, unlike my young patients. Tyler was the first to break the silence, showing up at my apartment on a rainy Sunday evening with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine. "I should have stood up for you sooner," he said as we sat at my small kitchen table. "At the rehearsal dinner, when Madison moved you." I started to say something but then backed down. "I've been doing that our whole lives, and I'm sorry." "It's okay, Tyler. Madison's always been a force of nature. It's easier to go along than stand against her." "Maybe, but that doesn't make it right." He poured us each a glass of wine. I told them, Mom, Dad, and Madison, that what happened was wrong. That they've been treating you differently our whole lives in ways I was too self-absorbed to fully notice until now. His support meant more than I could express. We spent the evening reminiscing about our childhood, but with a new honesty about the family dynamics we'd both observed but never discussed. The following day, I received an unexpected visitor at my office, Jessica, William's sister, who had covered my rehearsal dinner bill. "I hope you don't mind me tracking you down," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I wanted to check how you're doing after everything." "I'm surviving," I admitted. "Some moments are harder than others." Jessica nodded sympathetically. "I wanted you to know that what you did at the reception took incredible courage. And for what it's worth, several family members approached me afterward expressing their dismay at how you were treated." She shared her own experiences with family exclusion. Being the only one in her family to pursue law rather than finance had made her something of an outsider in the Huntington clan. While not comparable to adoption-related rejection, her stories of navigating family expectations provided welcome solidarity. We made plans to meet for coffee the following week, the beginning of what would become a valued friendship. At home that evening, I found a text message from my mother. "We miss you at Sunday dinner. What happened at the wedding was unfortunate, but surely we can move past it as a family." The casual dismissal of my experience as merely unfortunate rather than harmful stung. After considerable thought, I responded, "I need time." What happened at the rehearsal dinner and throughout the wedding planning wasn't a minor misunderstanding. It was the culmination of years of being treated as less than a full family member. I'm open to reconciliation, but only with acknowledgement of that pattern and commitment to change. Her reply came quickly, "You're being overly sensitive. Madison was under tremendous stress, and you chose to make a scene at her wedding. Your father and I expect an apology before we can move forward." Reading her words, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I could see clearly how my family's narrative had always placed the burden of adaptation on me rather than examining their own behavior. I didn't respond to the text, setting a boundary that was long overdue. A week later, I received a voicemail from my father while I was in a therapy session with Dr. Reynolds. "Sam, it's Dad. This situation has gone on long enough. Your mother is upset, Madison is upset, and frankly, I'm disappointed in your behavior. A family doesn't air its problems in public as you did at the wedding. Call me when you're ready to apologize so we can put this unpleasantness behind us." Dr. Reynolds helped me process my feelings about this message, which so clearly prioritized family appearance over my emotional reality. "Setting boundaries isn't about punishing them," she reminded me. "It's about protecting yourself from further harm while you heal." With her guidance, I drafted a clear, compassionate email to my parents expressing my love for them alongside my need for acknowledgement of the hurt I'd experienced. "I cannot and will not apologize for finally speaking my truth," I wrote. "I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms when you're ready to recognize the pattern of exclusion I've experienced." The holidays approached, traditionally a time centered around the Brooks family traditions. This year would be my first Christmas spent apart from my adoptive family. Rather than dwelling in sadness, I worked with Dr. Reynolds to create new traditions. I volunteered at a children's hospital Christmas event, hosted a small dinner for colleagues without local family, and accepted an invitation to Jessica's New Year's Eve party. During this period, I received an unexpected card from my great-aunt Evelyn, Eleanor's elderly aunt who had always been kind but somewhat distant. "Dear Samantha," she wrote in shaky handwriting, "I wanted you to know that I was deeply troubled by what transpired at Madison's wedding. Having spent my life observing this family, I've seen how differently you've been treated despite everyone's claims to the contrary. Your courage in speaking up was admirable. Family should be about love, not blood. You remain in my thoughts." Her validation from within the family circle provided unexpected comfort, confirming that my perceptions weren't distorted by oversensitivity as my mother had suggested. Professionally, this period brought unexpected growth. Channeling my energy into my work, I developed an innovative approach to physical therapy for children with attachment disorders, integrating emotional processing techniques with traditional physical rehabilitation. My program gained attention within Boston's medical community, leading to speaking invitations at several conferences and a feature in a respected medical journal. As I built a life independent of the Brooks family approval, I began to recognize how much of my identity had been constructed around being the grateful adopted daughter. Without that role, I was free to discover who I truly was and what I genuinely wanted. I deepened friendships with colleagues who appreciated me for myself, joined a book club that introduced me to diverse perspectives, and even began dating again after years of focusing primarily on my career. One evening, as I shared dinner with a group of friends from the hospital, one of them raised a toast to Sam, who taught us all about choosing your family wisely. Looking around at these people who valued me without qualification or history, I realized I was building my chosen family, a network of connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or biology. This realization didn't eliminate the pain of my adoptive family situation, but it provided a counterbalance, showing me that belonging was possible without compromising my dignity. 3 months after Madison's wedding, I was leaving Boston Children's Hospital after a particularly challenging day when I spotted a familiar figure in the hospital lobby, Eleanor, my adoptive mother. She sat alone on a bench, her normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, a magazine untouched in her lap. My first instinct was to duck into a side corridor to avoid an awkward encounter, but something in her posture, a vulnerability I rarely associated with my poised, controlled mother, stopped me. Before I could decide on a course of action, she looked up and our eyes met across the lobby. "Samantha," she said, rising quickly. "I was hoping to catch you. Is everything all right? Is someone sick?" I asked, immediate concern overriding our estrangement. "No, nothing like that," she assured me. "I had an appointment with Dr. Lerner. He's been my rheumatologist for years." She hesitated. "I was hoping we might talk, if you have time." Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from another dismissal of my feelings, but curiosity won out. "There's a cafe around the corner if you'd like to get coffee," I offered cautiously. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at a small table in the back of Cafe Nero, 2 steaming mugs between us. Eleanor fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from her. "I've been seeing a therapist," she began, surprising me. Eleanor had always dismissed therapy as something for people who can't handle their problems privately. She continued, "After what happened at Madison's wedding, Tyler insisted that I examine my behavior toward you. The things he pointed out, patterns I hadn't recognized or had justified to myself." She took a deep breath, then met my eyes directly. "Samantha, there's something I've never told you. Something I've never told anyone except your father." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "I was adopted too," she said quietly. My birth mother was a teenage girl from my father's company. It was all handled very discreetly. This was in the 1950s when such things were kept absolutely secret. I was raised never to speak of it, to behave as if I were born into the family. My adoptive parents never mentioned it after telling me when I was 12. It was as if they expected me to pretend along with them that it had never happened. I stared at her, speechless. This revelation contextualized so much about Eleanor's behavior, her rigid adherence to social expectations, her discomfort with my occasional questions about my biological parents, her compliance with Madison's exclusionary behavior. Tears filled her eyes, something I'd witnessed only a handful of times in my life. When Madison began treating you differently, I should have stopped it immediately. Instead, I enabled it because confronting her behavior would mean confronting my own unresolved feelings about belonging. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, just as my parents had taught me to do. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "At first, you were too young. Then I told myself it would only complicate your adjustment. Eventually, it became a secret I'd kept too long to easily reveal." She reached across the table, hesitantly touching my hand. "I failed you, Samantha. I recognized your pain because it mirrored my own, yet I did nothing to protect you from experiencing the same rejection I had felt. I'm deeply, truly sorry." Her apology, so long awaited and now offered with such vulnerability, left me momentarily speechless. This was the acknowledgement I had needed, not just of specific incidents, but of the pattern that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. "I can't promise I'll get everything right moving forward," Eleanor continued when I didn't immediately respond. "I've spent 65 years building walls around this part of myself. But I'm trying to do better, to understand how my unhealed wounds have hurt you." "I appreciate you telling me this," I said carefully. "It helps me understand a lot about our family." but it doesn't erase what happened or make it hurt any less. I know, she nodded. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or for everything to return to how it was. I'm asking for a chance to build something new, something more honest, with clear boundaries that you set. If you're willing. We talked for over 2 hours in that cafe, covering ground that had been forbidden territory throughout my childhood. Eleanor shared details about her own adoption experience, the subtle ways she had felt different despite her parents' wealth and privilege. I shared how Madison's behavior had affected me from childhood, and how the rehearsal dinner had been a breaking point rather than an isolated incident. When we finally parted, we had agreed to move forward with cautious contact, occasional lunches, perhaps, with the understanding that I needed time and space to process this new information. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was an honest beginning. A week later, Richard asked to meet me for dinner. Unlike Eleanor's vulnerable cafe conversation, this meeting took place at an upscale restaurant where Richard was well known by the staff. Ever the businessman, my adoptive father seemed to believe a nice setting might smooth over difficult conversations. Your mother told me about their conversation, he began after ordering drinks. About her adoption and everything else. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've never been good at discussing emotions, Samantha. Numbers, deals, investments, those make sense to me. People are more complicated. He straightened his silverware, a nervous habit I recognized from tense family dinners past. But Tyler made me see that my discomfort doesn't excuse my failure to protect you. I allowed Madison's behavior because confrontation makes me uncomfortable. That was cowardly. Coming from my stoic, proud father, this admission was remarkable. It hurt when you didn't say anything at the rehearsal dinner, I acknowledged. When you let Madison move me and then charge me for the meal. Richard winced visibly. I didn't know about the bill until after the wedding, he clarified. That was entirely Madison's doing, not something I approved. But that doesn't excuse my silence when she moved you from the family table. There's no justification for that. His apology, while less emotionally revealing than Eleanor's, seemed equally sincere in its own way. Richard had always expressed care through practical support rather than words, paying for my education, helping me purchase my first car, offering career advice. His explicit acknowledgement of wrongdoing represented a significant shift in our relationship. We agreed to monthly dinners, a commitment that felt manageable as we navigated this new terrain. As with Eleanor, it wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step toward healing. Madison, predictably, maintained her distance. She and William returned from an extended European honeymoon to settle into married life in a Beacon Hill brownstone not far from our parents' home. Through Tyler, I learned she had been furious about my wedding reception speech and considered my actions unforgivably selfish. I didn't expect reconciliation with my sister anytime soon, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted one without fundamental changes in how she viewed me. My relationship with Tyler, meanwhile, grew stronger. Free from the unspoken rule of not acknowledging family tensions, we began having more honest conversations about our shared childhood and our parents' dynamics. Tyler confessed his own feelings of inadequacy in our high-achieving family and his struggles to establish an identity separate from the Brooks financial legacy. You were always braver than me, he told me during one of our regular dinners. You carved out your own path, while I followed the one laid out for me. We each did the best we could with what we knew, I replied, realizing this applied to all of us, even Madison in her own way. As months passed, I established a new normal, limited, boundaried contact with my parents, close connection with Tyler, friendship with Jessica, and complete distance from Madison. It wasn't the family relationship I had spent decades trying to achieve, but it was more authentic than what had come before. 1 year after Madison's wedding and the dramatic confrontation that had reshaped my family relationships, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My apartment, once decorated with Brooks family photos and mementos, now reflected my own taste and experiences, artwork from local Boston artists, photographs of trips taken with friends, and shelves filled with books that had guided my journey towards self-acceptance. My friendship circle had expanded and deepened. Weekly dinners with colleagues had evolved into genuine friendships. Jessica and I spoke several times a week, our connection having grown beyond our shared family experiences to a friendship based on mutual respect and similar values. Most surprisingly, I had begun dating Michael Abrams, a pediatric surgeon I'd met through a hospital fundraiser. Unlike previous relationships where I'd held back parts of myself, with Michael I shared openly about my adoption, my complicated family dynamics, and my ongoing journey towards self-acceptance. His own experience growing up in a blended family gave him unique insight into the complexities of non-traditional family structures. Family is what you make it, he often said, a philosophy reflected in his close relationships with step-siblings and half-siblings. My relationship with my parents had stabilized into a new pattern. Monthly dinners with Richard had evolved into genuine conversations rather than surface-level pleasantries. He had even visited my workplace, showing interest in my professional accomplishments in a way he never had before. Eleanor and I met for lunch every few weeks, our conversations gradually becoming more authentic as she continued her therapy and worked to dismantle decades of emotional barriers. Tyler and I had grown closer than ever. He had begun questioning his own life choices, inspired partly by my example of pursuing meaningful work rather than prestige. He was considering leaving the investment firm to teach business ethics at a university, a prospect that both excited and terrified him. Alexis, now his wife after a small ceremony in the Berkshires, fully supported this potential career change. Madison remained distant. She had sent a formal Christmas card signed the Huntingtons, but otherwise maintained her silence. Through family grapevine, I knew she was involved in planning numerous charity galas and had joined several prestigious Boston social committees, following Eleanor's traditional path perfectly. The real test of our new family dynamic came with Richard and Eleanor's 40th anniversary celebration, which had finally arrived after being planned for over a year. The event was scheduled at the Boston Harbor Hotel, with 100 guests invited to commemorate their marriage. I arrived feeling nervous but composed, wearing a midnight blue gown that made me feel confident. Michael accompanied me, his reassuring presence helping to calm my anxiety about navigating this family milestone. Eleanor spotted me immediately upon our arrival, crossing the room to greet us with genuine warmth. "Samantha, you look beautiful," she said, embracing me briefly before turning to Michael. "And this must be the doctor we've heard so much about. Richard will be thrilled to meet you." Throughout the evening, I noticed subtle but significant changes in how I was included. When the photographer gathered the family for portraits, Eleanor specifically requested my presence. "We need Samantha in these," she said firmly when Madison began to object. In his anniversary speech, Richard acknowledged each of his children's accomplishments, mentioning my work with pediatric trauma patients with evident pride. Madison maintained a cool politeness throughout the event, neither engaging nor overtly excluding me. It wasn't friendship, but it was civil coexistence, perhaps the best we could hope for given our history. The most meaningful moment came when Eleanor presented me with a small velvet box during a quiet moment away from the crowd. "This was my grandmother's," she explained as I opened it to reveal an antique sapphire pendant. Not a Brooks family heirloom, but from my maternal biological family. My birth mother made sure it came to me when I was 18. "I want you to have it, a reminder that family connections can transcend adoption, time, and even understanding." The gesture brought tears to my eyes, not because of the monetary value of the gift, but because it represented Eleanor's acknowledgement of our shared experience as adoptees and her commitment to creating a new pattern for our family. Around this time, I received unexpected news from a lawyer handling my biological parents' estate. A small investment account that had been held in trust until my 30th birthday had matured and was now available to me. The sum wasn't life-changing, about $30,000, but it represented a tangible connection to Maria and James Wilson, the parents I barely remembered. After careful consideration, I decided to use this inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for adopted children facing educational challenges. The Wilson Brooks Educational Fund would provide tutoring, enrichment activities, and college application support to help adopted children navigate the educational system with additional resources. The hyphenated name was intentional, an acknowledgement of both parts of my heritage. When I shared this plan with Eleanor and Richard, they surprised me by offering to match the initial donation, doubling the fund's impact. "It's a wonderful way to honor both your families," Richard said, using the plural deliberately. As the fund took shape, so did my advocacy work with adopted children. In addition to my clinical practice, I began leading support groups for adult adoptees navigating complex family dynamics. My own experience provided valuable insight, and the groups quickly grew from 3 participants to over 15, meeting twice monthly. One afternoon, I received a text message from Madison that turned my stomach into knots, an invitation to her baby shower, scheduled for the following month. After a year of near-complete silence, this olive branch, if that's what it was, caught me completely off guard. I discussed the invitation with Dr. Reynolds in our now-monthly therapy sessions. "What do you hope to gain by attending?" she asked, helping me clarify my own expectations. "And what boundaries would you need to maintain to protect yourself?" After much reflection, I decided to attend, bringing a thoughtfully selected gift, but keeping my emotional investment measured. The event would be held at our parents' home, providing some buffer through their presence. The baby shower was as elaborate as I'd expected, professionally decorated with a woodland theme, catered food, and about 30 of Madison's closest friends in attendance. I arrived feeling guarded but determined to remain civil for the sake of my parents and Tyler. To my surprise, Madison approached me directly as I was admiring the elaborate cake display. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "I wasn't sure either," I replied honestly. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us before Madison spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said at my wedding. About family being defined by love, not blood or documents." I waited, unsure where this was heading. Becoming pregnant has made me think about what kind of mother I want to be, what kind of family I want to create. She hesitated. "I don't want my child to ever make someone feel the way I made you feel." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest Madison had ever come to acknowledging her behavior. "The thing is, Sam," she continued, dropping her voice slightly, "I was jealous of you. You were smart and determined, and you created your own path. Everyone always talked about how impressive that was, while I just did what was expected of me. It was easier to push you away than to admit I admired you." Her confession stunned me. The idea that confident, perfect Madison could have envied me seemed impossible. Yet the vulnerability in her expression suggested sincerity rather than manipulation. "I don't expect us to suddenly be best friends," she added when I didn't immediately respond. "Too much has happened. But I'm hoping we can start over somehow. For the baby's sake, if nothing else. I don't want them growing up in a family with this kind of rift." "I'd like that," I said carefully. A fresh start, with clear boundaries and honest communication. It wasn't a Hollywood ending with tearful embraces and instant forgiveness. Madison and I would likely never share the close sisterly bond I'd yearned for as a child. But the acknowledgement of past harm and the mutual desire to build something healthier represented progress I hadn't thought possible. That December, I hosted a holiday gathering at my apartment. Something I'd never done during the years when Brooke's family traditions had dominated the calendar. Michael helped me decorate, transforming my modest space with twinkling lights and fragrant pine garlands. The guest list reflected my newly balanced life: Jessica and her partner, Tyler and Alexis, 2 close colleagues and their families, Eleanor and Richard, who attended for dessert only, respecting my independence while accepting my invitation, and even Madison and William, who made a brief appearance. As I looked around at this gathering, some biological family, some adopted family, some chosen family, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for decades. The journey hadn't been easy, and the scars from years of subtle exclusion wouldn't disappear overnight. But I had finally found the courage to define family on my own terms, to build connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or biology. That hard-won wisdom was worth every painful moment of the journey. Family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's built through love, respect, and the courage to be honest about both our needs and our boundaries. Sometimes the family we're born or adopted into can evolve to meet those needs, and sometimes we need to create our chosen family elsewhere. Either way, our worth isn't determined by others' acceptance, but by our own self-knowledge and the boundaries we're brave enough to establish. What experiences have shaped your understanding of family? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones to protect your well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps me continue sharing these deeply personal experiences that I hope might help others facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be valued exactly as you are, without conditions or qualifications.